Okay, so the recording started. So yeah, welcome to this session, everyone. It's called Best Practice Recommendations for Improving Fair Data Maturity in Wind Energy. I'll be presenting together with Harry Richardson. I am from the Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences. I lead the Wind Energy Innovation Group there, and I've been chairing this working group who developed these recommendations. And so that's me. I also lead IEA Wind Task 43, which is about digitalization. We have quite a lot of overlaps with the group. And Harry, do you want to quickly tell people who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Harry Richardson. I'm Marine Data Advisor at the Crown Estate. So I support the management of our open access database, the Marine Data Exchange, which I'll be presenting on later this morning.
Cool, thank you. And then we have this slide about the 6 guiding principles of Research Data Alliance. So if some of you are not familiar with those, then just a just a reminder that openness, consensus, harmonization, community-driven, non-profit, and technology-neutral, and inclusivity are important. I love these. I love these. All these words. Maybe we should take them over for our work. Um, onto the agenda. So the original plan was to have the first part about 50 minutes, where actually I've prepared a presentation about the best practice recommendations. And then after that, Harry would present this use case where we're working on this value demonstration. And then we have a bit of time for discussion about this value demonstration process. And then the idea of part 2 is to think about how we can do something similar for fair software maturity. We're actually planning a working group in the new phase of IEA Wind Task 43 on this topic, so we can work out if we want to do that with Task 43, or we want to have an RDA group, or what we want to do about that. And I think that Carlos will tell us a little bit about that fair software group, which I think will be very useful for us here. I see that Harry's disappeared. I guess he's going to come back in a second. So I'll do the presentation of the best practice recommendations a bit quicker because Yuri and Bridget, well, Bridget, you were involved at some point. Maybe it's not bad to have a reminder of what the final version is. And Harry and me have been working on this value demonstration together anyway. So I'll do it a bit quicker than planned, and we'll get to Harry's presentation then a bit earlier. So yeah, so the point, I mean, the driver of this was the fact that, well, wind energy is important for the future of the world. And one of the challenges in wind energy at the moment is digitalization. And for us, digitalization means creating value from data. So there's all this data coming off the wind turbines. How can we create values, and how can we make the dealing with this data efficient, basically? And one of the things we identified as being a challenge in digitalization was the lack of data maturity and the lack of fairness. And so the goal of this working group was to basically address this and create best practice recommendations specifically for improving the fairness of data in wind energy. It's especially because the wind energy community is not really versed on this whole idea of fair data. Sorry, I have some weird thing going on with the order of the things that are being presented here. Anyway, so the group is called the Wind Energy Community Standards Working Group. And what we did, we spent 18 months on this. So first of all, we reviewed and evaluated the current data sharing and publishing landscape. We then chose some data publishing platforms that we wanted to analyze for fairness. We then chose a tool that we wanted to do the analysis with. And then we did the analysis, and then based on the results, we came up with the recommendations. Just a sort of quick summary of this review. On the right, you can see actually a picture by Yuri about what the semantic artifacts in wind energy looked like kind of before we started, and what they look like now. So you can see the green Greenbit's got much bigger basically, so we've been able to identify the different semantic artifacts and also link create entries on the Technoportal, which was part of a separate project we did. But the basic summary was that there's very limited community-driven development and adoption. There's no recognized sector-level ontology, little alignment with upper-level ontologies, minimal reuse of existing artifacts. There's a very large focus on operational stage of wind energy. There's nothing available for later stages. And then the existing artifacts are mainly taxonomies and vocabularies and not formalized. So we have to rely on manual processing. And that was kind of the findings of that. So the response was to, first of all, form a working group to develop some ontologies, which Yuri is here next to me, leading in Task 43. And we've got a community in our We Do Win platform where we try to work on those together. And then we also looked at different data sources available on the web. And so we divided the different platform types into catalog, repository, dashboard, knowledge hub, and a website. We made a big list of these. Actually, this list is available now. I can give you the link in the chat. And we did like this Sankey diagram analysis of the different data sources. So you can see 30 were domain specific and 11 were general. And this is the split of the type of data, the type of platform. And then on the right, you can see which of them are recognized by this automated tool, Fuji, and which ones are not. Yeah, and then we basically came to a conclusion that these are the data platforms that we want to analyze. We wanted to get a mix of different types. You can see the Wind Data Hub from Bridget Thrasher is here, and then the Marine Data Exchange that Harry will be talking about later is also here. We have Zenodo, we have some university platforms, we have some more specific ones as well, and also a couple of websites where people have made data available. Yeah, and then we decided to do the analysis with the Fair Data Maturity Model. We did analyze different tools. So the Fuji, for example, didn't work for all the data sets, so we decided not to use it. And we found the Fair Data Maturity model the easiest to use. We did make some adaptations, so we didn't. First of all, the question wasn't, we didn't analyze specific data sets, so we analyzed platforms. So we actually asked the question, does this platform have the option to do that in the context of wind energy? Also, we understood metadata to refer to information on the website. I remember, Bridget, you were involved in this conversation actually at the beginning. And then we also assessed the criteria on a 1 and 0 scale, yes and no, rather than 1 to 4, because we found it difficult to analyze using the 1 to 4 scale. We also added some specific criteria. So can you link to wind energy terms? Can you link the analysis code? Can you plot the data? Can you preview the structure, the data and the file structure? Because we decided they were important as well. So yeah, then we assessed using this adapted tool, these data sets. And yeah, we had various results. So this is showing just the original criteria without our extra criteria. We've colored them according to repository, knowledge hub, company website, and dashboard. So generally you can see that the repositories are higher, except for, this is why we've got Harry, except for the Marine Data Exchange. I think that's because it doesn't issue DOIs, as far as I remember.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt. Do you want to turn your screen off? Because I don't know if it's only me. You're breaking up quite a bit.
Oh, shit. Okay. Turning the screen off. You mean my camera? Oh, I can also connect to different.
I can hear you fine, Sarah, so I don't know if it's a issue from someone else's end.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I mean, Bridget's already turned her camera off.
Can you give me?
It's on there. And then we also analysed, I won't go into these in detail, but we analysed the FAIR separately as well. So for example, the I was one of the worst, the interoperable, mainly because we don't have fair compliant vocabularies in wind energy. I'll skip over that. You can see that in the report. We did define some limitations of our analysis. So when we were doing it, we noticed that the 1-0 analysis was quite, obviously it was quite black and white, right? So it wasn't really nuanced. It was basically, can it do that or can't it do that? You can walk behind me maybe to get it. And then we had some other challenges that we discussed about the criteria. So some of the RDA F201M, for example, we weren't really sure what would constitute rich metadata and what granularity of metadata would actually satisfy it. And then with the interoperability number 2, the 1-0 doesn't really communicate whether the vocabularies are fair compliant. And then the last one, we think that the accuracy and relevancy is use case dependent. Anyway, the details of those challenges we put in the report as well. We also found it sometimes quite difficult to assess some of the criteria because it requires some specific technical knowledge about the platform. So we needed actually access to the source code, which we didn't have, and also domain experts might not have. And then we thought that if we actually took a platform user's perspective, it might be more, rather than a platform developer perspective, it might be more useful for assessing the fairness. But anyway, so we analyzed the results, and then we developed recommendations split into these categories. So we had platform publishers, platform developers, and then we had data publishers, so people like researchers or people wanting to publish their data. And then we had the general community, because there's quite a few community things that need doing in wind energy. And so for the platform publishers, the first one is that we said that these platforms should converge on how to include rich metadata. The second recommendation was that the developers should perform an analysis like the one we've done here, but regularly, and then they can keep a track on the fairness and how to improve it. The third one was that platforms should have FAQ pages which explain how users can use the functionalities, because often the users are domain experts and don't really know or understand how to use some of the functionalities. The fourth one is that we thought maybe the developers could use something like badges or some sort of gamification to incentivize them to make their data as fair as possible, or even just to submit more data. And then the fifth one was that new platforms should build on existing platforms rather than creating from scratch. So for example, we're thinking of developing a wind energy platform, and we're now talking to the Open Energy platform about integrating something with them, because they've been developing it for the last 10 years. So rather than us starting it again from scratch. And number 6 was that we think that developers should meet regularly on a virtual platform to discuss common challenges. So for example, IEA Wind Task 43 or an RDA group. And then the 7th one, that the platforms should ensure that their records can be harvested by data catalogs, including Fuji, right? So we mentioned before that some of them Fuji couldn't access them. I think for the wind data hub, that was the case as well, as far as I can remember. I don't know, Bridget, we talked about it at some point. Can't quite remember anymore.
There are 2 different things. One is the automated fairness assessment tools, which is like Fuji, and the other one is like data catalogs, which is like Google's.
Yeah, there's actually 2 separate ones.
I can actually have the page, so I can say.
And then the 8th one for the platform developers was yeah, that they should engage with domain experts to ask about community standards, like what is the state of the art of the vocabulary available? Because there might not be anything fully published or finished, but there might be some drafts or some work in progress that they can get involved in. And number 9 was for central search interfaces. Metadata harvesting schemes should be provided to allow federated data infrastructures. And then we've got some examples about how that can be done. So they were the ones for the data platform developers, and now for the publishers. So we're basically saying people should use the high scoring platforms. So Zenodo was high scoring, but also the university ones, like we had TU Delft and ETH Zurich and DTU, they all scored pretty highly. So we're basically recommending to use these. And also on Zenodo, we've created We Do Wind Zenodo community that people can submit to, and that means that somebody in our team can curate the metadata. The second one is that if organizations prefer to publish data sets on their website rather than on a data catalog like Zenodo, a good practice is to archive them in a recognized repository and then reference from their website. So Cubico and Res did that recently. Cubico not because of us, but Res because of us. But there are other websites like EDP and Ørsted where the data is just on the platform, and actually the EDP one disappeared during the analysis, which is why that platform scored 0. Then we say data publishers should use a repository that relies on controlled vocabularies or even ontology terms to provide metadata attributes. So for example, Zenodo uses keywords and subjects, and you can use control vocabularies such as the Euro Sci Voc, except the word for wind energy there is wind power instead of wind energy. We reported that. Tried to get it changed because I think in all the other languages it's wind energy, and in English it's wind power, which we find a bit strange. There's also an open energy metadata standard on the open energy platform. And then number 4 is that data publishers should actually then select these terms from control vocabularies when they're available. And if the platform allows free text tagging, terms should be used from an established vocabulary rather than creating new ones. And that's a little bit difficult in wind energy at the moment, which is something we're trying to change. And then the final one is the general community. So we think that anybody in the community should contribute to these community information models so that we can actually have wind energy specific vocabulary. And we are doing this, but we need experts we can coordinate it, but we need experts to come in and tell us what words they want to use or what connections there should be between the concepts. The second one is that we think the community should contribute to the wind energy. It's not called the wind energy domain ontology anymore. It's called the wind energy ontology, which Yuri is leading. And the third one is that we think people should contribute to the wind energy, the taxonomy of topics for publishing data, which then should be connected to this wind energy domain ontology. We don't currently have a group developing the taxonomy of topics, but we are thinking about starting it. And then finally, we think that international collaborations such as IEA or Wind Europe should actually run regular fairness benchmarks and then publish dashboards showing the results. But we need to address this still. We haven't done anything on that yet. Somebody needs to coordinate it. And then we think that domain experts should actually approach platform developers to include the standards in their platform. So for example, we should be talking to Harry and Bridget about doing that on their platform and other platform developers. And then we also think that members of the community should share training material, because we've noticed that the topic is very difficult for domain experts to understand. Like, we spent years understanding it, and we had to write a very long, detailed review paper to sort of get our understanding up, and many other people don't really have time or patience to do that. So we think that topic should be pushed as well. So yeah, finally the lessons learned. So we found that community engagement is essential, but it's difficult to motivate people. I mean, this group wasn't a big group. There were only 3 or 4 people actually really involved. And balancing ambition with practicality is also important. So originally we wanted to do much more than we ended up doing. And then finally, yeah, we have to be flexible and dynamic because it's changing all the time. So even through the time where we were developing these, new platforms came along, or this whole topic of generative AI and LLMs and stuff came along, and it's quite, it's a changing environment. So we have to be able to keep up with that. So yeah, the link to the group is here. I can put it in the chat as well. So now I move on to maybe the more interesting part for everybody here, to Harry, to talk about what we're doing in IEA Wind Task 43 to try to show how these recommendations can actually be used to create value. So you want to take over here, Harry?
Brilliant. Yeah. Should I share screen or do you want to continue?
Yeah, you can do it if you can.
Oh, I
And
don't
then
know. I don't trust the technology. I'll let you do
Okay,
it.
I'll just flick, it's fine. You tell
Yeah,
me.
that's all right. Are these my slides? My slides I think start on.
Oh, your comes later, so I'll pass over to you when when the Marine Data Exchange comes up.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we want to do here is that we want to demonstrate the value of the recommendations for these 3 stakeholder groups. So the idea is to consider some use cases and try to sort of tell a story about how they solved a particular problem. Bridget Thatcher would love to do this with the Wind Data Hub as well as with the Marine Data Exchange. So pay attention. We first of all we tried to define a few stakeholders. So for the data publishing platform developers, Harry was here, so we sort of jumped on him, and we're doing a test with the Marine Data Exchange. But because we also have contact with Bridget and the Wind Data Hub, we thought we could move to that one next as well. And then for the publishers, what we thought is that we could work together with people who they've either published data on Zenodo or they've published it somewhere else where it's easy to imagine that we can improve it. So some of these IEA Wind tasks, as part of an internal project at my university, we're already analysing some of this data, and so we're gonna use the analysis because we're doing it anyway. But I'm also in contact with Ørsted because they have a website where data is available, like if you email them and tell them what you want to use it for, and then you sign an NDA. And I'm actually meeting them at Wind Europe in April to talk about whether it could be an advantage to make their data more fair. Then there's a couple of other examples that we're working on trying to attract people. But in parallel to that, we're developing this process. So the process is that we first contact the owners, the use case owners. We then want to ask some questions about their platform or data and define some indicators. How do we actually measure the value? And then we want to do like a fairness analysis, basically similar to the one we already did in this work for their platform or data set, and then create dedicated recommendations for them. So they might not be exactly the same as the general recommendations. Originally, we were thinking of just using the general recommendations, but then we realized it wouldn't be so much more difficult to do dedicated ones. So an example is Ørsted. They don't actually want their data to be findable. No, they want it to be findable. I don't think they actually want it to be accessible to everybody. So they might not want the A to get higher. So the generic recommendations might not work for them, but we can still tell them how to make their metadata more findable, for example. Yeah, and then we thought the idea is to implement the recommendations or the most promising ones, and then measure the impact of actually implementing them based on the KPIs. So then we came up with this template that we'll ask the use case owners to fill out, which Harry will demonstrate in a minute that we did together. So the stakeholder gives then the organization name, the platform name, but then tell us who are the platform users and what do they use the platform for, why are they developing the platform, why are they interested in making it fair or more fair, and how could we measure then the benefit of making it more fair. We have a template also then for the data publishers, which is similar, but here we're asking basically why does this person want to publish data, who's using it, and why do they want it to be more fair, and which KPIs could measure the benefit. And then the same for the community. Which community do you contribute to, and how does it increase the fairness? Why do you contribute to the community? Why do you want to increase the fairness, and what KPIs could we use? Yeah, so now I want to show how we've been working on this with the Marine Data Exchange. So now I think, Harry, it would be a good time.
Well, yeah, thank you for that introduction. And for those who've joined since I did my introduction, I'm Harry Richardson, Marine Data Advisor at the Crown Estate, and I support the management of the Marine Data Exchange, which has already been mentioned a few times this morning. So, I mean, this process started a while back now when this report, the Fair Data Recommendations, first came across my desk, and obviously it sort of I immediately became interested in it because we were included. The Marine Data Exchange, as you saw, was included within those charts, and for various reasons, we were scoring relatively low on each of the independent FAIR scores. So therefore, as a data advisor working on the Marine Data Exchange, who's sort of one of my core purposes is to make sure that our data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It was not alarming, but it raised a flag that we actually need to look into this a bit more, work with the likes of Sarah and see what recommendations that came out of that report we can actually include. And that's sort of where this began. So I'm glad to be presenting here today. I will get on to some of those questions that Sarah alluded to in that template and the answers and how that relates to this case study, the Marine Data Exchange. But before, I'll give a little bit of an introduction. So the Marine Data Exchange was established back in 2013, so it's over a decade old now, and it was made as fundamentally back then it was made to store offshore wind survey data. It's changed quite a bit now, so it's not just focused on offshore wind, and it's ultimately a open access repository for marine data and evidence around English, Welsh, Northern Ireland, and now Scottish waters. So we host data, both environmental and technical survey data. So technical being sort of hydrographic site investigation data collected throughout the lifetime of offshore projects. As I say, typically this is offshore wind based on the industry and the tailwinds within the UK right now, but also includes other industries more latterly as well. We also contain evidence and research, so it's not just about hosting data for the sake of data, but having research and making sure that there's impact from that data. So we publish data, we fund data at the Crown Estate. We fund research ourselves at the Crown Estate through the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme, and we use the MDE, the Marine Data Exchange, as a repository for that research to close evidence gaps and to share some of the outputs from these data sets. The ultimate goal, as you can see from those three right boxes, the second paragraph is to accelerate and de-risk the consenting in offshore projects, streamline these processes, and enable all of our users to accelerate clean energy deployment and nature recovery through using survey campaigns that have already been conducted. You may be aware that a lot of these survey campaigns, they take years to sort of contract out, perform, process, and analyze, and that costs a lot of money as well. If we can make sure that people don't have to redo these surveys, but can use them time and time again, collect once, use many times, if you will, then that saves a huge amount of money and time as well. And that's where the Marine Data Exchange fits in. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Sarah. So this gives a bit of a snapshot of what the Marine Data Exchange is like in January of this year. The point of showing this, not that it's too important or pertinent to these slides, is to show the diversity of data we have on the Marine Data Exchange. So you can see that pie chart at the top indicates that 70% of data is related to wind. So this doesn't mean wind data, but this means data that has been collected through the development of an offshore wind project. And you can see the rest there is made up with aggregates, wave and tidal, and then 7.1% is research. And that's rapidly increasing as we start to focus some more against how we can share research and get impact from these data sets. What I want to point your attention to is the the bar chart in the bottom middle there, so the data holding by theme, and this shows the diversity of data and the multidisciplinary nature of the Marine Data Exchange. So you can see we've got, I think there's over 16 themes, which sort of alludes to the type of data we hold on the Marine Data Exchange. The dominant one being geophysical, followed by birds, sediment, but it's also got stuff like engineering, design data, intertidal ecology, meteorology. So there's no sort of one type of data, which is where the Marine Data Exchange sits a bit uniquely compared to other databases and repositories, is that we're not just trying to sort of tick one box. We're not just trying to publish one data type for one user type. We've got many different data types for many different users, and that's what we'll get onto, and that poses a bit of a challenge to how we can up our fairness across the board on all those. So if we go to the next slide, we can start to get onto some of the questions that Sarah is asking in those templates. So before we get onto sort of our users, we can see a bit about the life cycle of the data on the Marine Data Exchange. So if you go up 9 o'clock there, on the left, data comes in, collected by industry, both data and research there. We then perform quality assurance. So we perform rigorous quality assurance on the Marine Data Exchange to make sure all of our data is robust and it meets the sort of guidelines that we hold them up to. In this case, it's the Marine Environmental Data and Information Network standards. So that's MEDIN, to make sure all of our data is of high enough quality. And again, that ties back into fairness down the line. Once that's done, then we publish it, open access on the Marine Data Exchange. So this means anybody can access it and use it for whatever they want, as long as it's in line with our terms of use, which I won't get into too much. Being open access is amazing. It's the benefit of the Marine Data Exchange. It's what we will always be and always strive for. However, it does mean we actually, when I'm trying to do analytics and understand and answer some of Sarah's questions about who's using our data sets, where our data is flowing, it's quite hard to get that gauge. I can see analytics, I can see numbers of how many people are using our data, and I know sort of these larger projects and programs who are using our data. However, on a daily basis, I don't know who is using our data because of the open access nature. And again, there's only so much we can do to get around that without locking off our data, which is absolutely not what we strive to do at the Crown Estate or the Marine Data Exchange. So once you've got that, the data feeds into industry, academics, and research and evidence projects there. Oh, we've lost the slides. There we go. Thank you. So these research and evidence projects can vary from various things. So it could be PhD research. So I support a PhD student up in Wales, looking at the impacts of benthic, or the benthic impacts of offshore wind farm. It could be internal research. We have our own research team, and we always churning out research to fill these evidence gaps, or external research as well. And that sort of brings in that offshore wind evidence and change program as well, which is a funding program for these large projects to understand the impacts of offshore wind particularly. Well, then once we go into the evidence projects, the data we get onto the Marine Data Exchange is fed into our whole of seabed program. So this is an internal program that understands how the Crown Estate can better develop the seabed moving forward to 2050, and using these data, just making sure we can get as most value from it as possible, and making sure any decisions we're making as the Crown Estate, as sort of aligned with the reality of what's on the seabed and the environment we have, as possible, making sure that we're prioritizing social value and nature recovery as well. So if we go on to the next slide, we get rid of that box, we'll be able to see what the answers are to these questions. And I've changed the format, so it's not in that table format. Hopefully that makes it a little bit more ingestible. So users, so who uses the Marine Data Exchange? As I alluded to, it's quite difficult to understand exactly who. I do my best, I do my darndest to try and keep a list of these ad hoc users and these larger programs of people using the Marine Data Exchange as and when I find out about them. But the majority of them, as you might have seen from that snapshot in the second slide, we have over 9,000 users on the Marine Data Exchange across 2025, and therefore we only know a small snapshot, because most people, as intended, don't log on to the Marine Data Exchange, but log on to the MDE, download the data they need, and then leave. And that's how it should work. They shouldn't need to get in contact with us. They shouldn't need to ask for support or help. It should be that way, but it does mean that sort of they go by and we don't necessarily know what they're using it for. So users are multidisciplinary. They're made up of academics, industry, public bodies, commercial, and just ad hoc interest. As you probably all sort of seeing, that they all probably have different interests and wants from the Marine Data Exchange. So an ad hoc interest, somebody who's just learning about the marine environment or the offshore wind industry. They just want the tidbits of knowledge. They want that to be highly surfaced, and they don't want to be troubled with big raw data sets that are terabytes large. However, if then you translate that to an industry user or a commercial user who wants to reprocess and combine vast amount of raw data, they don't necessarily mind about that high-level snippet. They want to be able to easily access this raw data sets without having any blockers. You can start to see here the challenge that the Marine Data Exchange faces, making sure that we're benefiting all of them, whilst not narrowing or channeling our database and our repository to just one of those users. And we're striving that balance constantly. Historically, we've been very much focused on let's get these data sets out there, because that's probably the majority, the people who actually want to use the data sets. As I say, more latterly, we're looking at how we can surface some of the data highlights, make some of this research more accessible, and pulling stuff like insights, highlights, and stories out to make it more digestible for sort of a layman, for example, who doesn't necessarily have the most knowledge of data and offshore wind industry. As you can see from the second point there, that sort of explains how people might be using it and what approach they may be coming to the Marine Data Exchange with. So learning versus ingestion of large data sets, meta-analysis of data sets, or just decision making. So again, public bodies or commercial might actually want to be just focusing on the reports and seeing what decisions and impacts they can get from the data sets. Again, all of them changing the perspective we look at with the MDE. However, all of them needing the same things. Regardless of what type of user you are, you need to have high quality metadata, you need to be confident in the robustness of the data, and you need to have fairness of the Marine Data Exchange. That's why we talk about fairness so much, and that's why we very much get on board with this idea of fairness and the recommendations out of fairness, is because no matter the complexities of the users of the Marine Data Exchange, all will benefit from the fairness. It's just how we go about implementing it and which recommendations we sort of choose to do based on which users we want to benefit at this time, because we can't do it all at once. So, as I said there, yeah, different users benefit from all aspects. So the purpose, on to the next slide. So the purpose of the Marine Data Exchange, I won't go into it too much because I alluded to it in this slide. It's really about safeguarding the data as one. As I say, a lot of time, effort, and money goes into collecting these data sets. Certain projects may not go forward with development, or they may time might pass and they may delete these data sets. We want to make sure we are safeguarding that data sets for decades to come, to make sure if there is another development in that area, or if there is a large meta-analysis that the industry are conducting, we are the people who can host that data. We can fund that data storage where it will just be deleted or lost to the ether. So not only, again, as I say, do we want to just store that data and safeguard it, we want to make sure we're facilitating, galvanizing the use of that data. So what can we do at the Crown Estate to accelerate and de-risk consenting, but also help our users utilize these data sets, find these data sets, access these data sets, and use them to the best of their ability to support the industry that ultimately the Crown Estate has a vested interest in. So that's the purpose. That's why we're so invested in fairness, and that's why we're invested in the Marine Data Exchange. So we've fully funded it since 2013. The goal is to benefit the industry, not necessarily ourselves, but it is all a sort of full feedback loop. So on to the next slide. So application of fairness, why do we care? And I have just sort of gone through that there, but if we go into each different aspect, as I think Sarah said, not everybody is interested in all aspects of fairness. Some people might want their data to be findable and interoperable, but actually they don't want it to be the most accessible. They might want to hold some data back. On the other hand, the MDE and the Crown Estate is really invested in each aspect of fair. So findable, we really want to make sure the Marine Data Exchange is put on the map. We want people to think of industry data and survey data in the UK and automatically go to the MDE. So we need to enhance our visibility and traction. And we really want to support the logic that is 2 clicks to data. So this is something that Medin, as I mentioned previously, work on. But it's essentially how can we limit the friction between finding the data and then downloading that data. So really we want it to be less than 2 clicks or less from the sort of Medin portal. So that's where our data is signposted. People shouldn't have to log in navigate some complex website. They should be able to really get that surface information and then the data within 2 clicks. So that's making it findable, and that's where we sort of start talking about some of that indexing and stuff as well. And it all comes back to high quality, consistent metadata. Then accessible. So this is making sure that all of the data that has been collected is accessible via the MDE, and that users understand what our holding is. So that comes with 2 aspects. That's reducing data gaps. So making sure that where gaps exist on our database, and to be transparent, there is gaps on our database and we are working to close them. So we're reducing them, and where the gaps exist because that legacy data has been lost or it's no longer attainable, we're making sure that we have transparency, making sure the data, people understand where the gaps are and why the gaps exist, so they don't, again, spend a lot of time looking for it. And that's quite a key thing we didn't necessarily always think about in the Marine Data Exchange, because we always just wanted to close the gaps, but sometimes these gaps can't be closed. And it's not about hiding the gaps, it's about making sure people understand where the gaps exist and why they exist. We also, when it comes to accessible, want to avoid barriers. As we all know, we can't be making things that go in the way between yourselves and downloading the data. So stuff like cold storage, logins, and knowledge all represent barriers to downloading data. We want to make sure anybody of technical ability or scientific ability can understand our data sets and our reports and our deliverables and download what they need. Again, reducing friction between the repository and the user. Interoperable is probably the one we spend the most time discussing at the Marine Data Exchange because it's quite difficult for us. Interoperability essentially highlights the ability to combine and analyze the data from many sources with very minimal processing. And that's how I define it, at least. Because of the multidisciplinary nature of the Marine Data Exchange, it means we've got a high diversity, variety of data. We've got images from aerial surveys of marine mammals, for example, and birds. We've also got raw geophysical data from multi-beam echo sounder, for example, saying what the shape of the seabed is. And then you've also got grab samples from benthic surveys. These will never be interoperable. We don't want to make these interoperable because it simply would not make sense to make imagery interoperable with benthic grabs and whatnot. So we need to understand, actually, in cases where we do, how can we do that to the best of our ability? So the Marine Data Exchange won't be interoperable in its entirety, but for example, we could bring together all of the raw geophysical data or the processed geophysical data into a single data product. So is there something we should be doing there that previously we haven't, to make sure that people who have a specific use case or a specific interest and data focus can use data interoperable on the MDE? And again, that's quite a gap and something we scored relatively low on the Marine Data Exchange. The goal of this is because it would ultimately enhance the ability for data pipelines and flows and enable more and wider use of a larger subset of the data on the MDE without, again, creating these barriers through having to reprocess and transform the data sets. Reusability. So again, we want people to be able to come to the Marine Data Exchange and use our data with confidence. If people can't reuse the data because it isn't compliant with guidelines or it doesn't have high quality metadata, it simply means that no matter how findable, accessible, and interoperable data is, people will not be able to integrate it into their work because they don't have confidence in the reliability and the robustness of it. And that's where we again partner up with Medin to make sure we do have this comprehensive, consistent, and high quality metadata. And that's where we do our own quality assurance as well to make sure it is reusable. So why do we care? I've done a little tagline there about why we care. Ultimately, it's a positive feedback system, and it's a loop that will keep going the better we make the Marine Data Exchange. The more fair our data is, the more people will access and use the data. Ultimately, that means the more data will be uploaded, and then the data will be more usable and valuable as well. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy where the better and the more higher quality and the more fair we facilitate, the more data will keep coming and the more users will keep coming as well. And that's been seen throughout the last decade. We started off in a relatively novel position and things were looking very different to what they are now. We've now established relationships with people like Medin and we've established data flows and pipelines and data management techniques where the fairness has only just been on the up. And we're working now with Sarah to make sure that we're continuing that and implementing some of the recommendations where we can to make sure this feedback loop continues. So on to the next. So this was the difficult question is how we actually measure it, and it's what Sarah and I have been going back and forth on for a bit now, because I think probably a lot of the words I've just been saying is we all agree. It goes without saying that fairness is good, and the more fair, you can't really go bad with something like the Marine Data Exchange. The challenge is, all well and good knowing that. The challenge is, how do we measure it? So how can I take it back to my organization, the Crown Estate, and say, okay, I want to invest in these changes for the Marine Data Exchange. I want to develop the Marine Data Exchange and implement these recommendations, which will take time and resources. I'm going to need to be able to measure the changes of fairness to make sure that these recommendations are valid, they're robust, and that there's actually point and backing to doing them. Otherwise, there's going to be less for tailwind behind me to get me to implement some of these recommendations. And I was having a think. So some of these recommendations are quite difficult. I extracted a few here. When we were sort of starting this work, the Marine Data Exchange didn't have much capacity, time-wise or resource-wise, to do some of the larger recommendations in terms of developmental changes and stuff like that. So these recommendations I've just extracted are some of the more soft recommendations that can be implemented somewhat easily with limited development. And I was thinking how we could measure changes to the fairness. And I sort of realized that it's very difficult because a lot of it is qualitative, not quantitative. So it's not necessarily the changes to fairness. You can't just sort of put a number against. And it's a lot more relying on communities, especially recommendations 1.6 and 1.8, and steering committees to harvest that feedback. And these time periods, so the time periods that we're working on, or a bit more glacial, I'll say. And there's other shorter momentum changes in repository traction. So what we're looking at, obviously some key analytics we could look at to determine fairness, is how many users, how many downloads, how much engagement time on the Marine Data Exchange. The changes we would make to these recommendations, for example, if we just take recommendations 1.3, an FAQ page is a relatively simple one. So this would be a detailed support documentation on how to use the Marine Data Exchange, how to find the data and reuse the data. We would never really be able to measure the impact of that without stuff like communities and steering committees to give us those feedback. And as I say, because the Marine Data Exchange is open access, we only engage with probably 0.1% of the users, because the rest of them just come and go using the data as they please. So this is work where we're sort of looking at now, and I don't necessarily have an answer for this call, but it's definitely something Sarah and I are taking away and learning how we can understand where these benefits lie and measure some of these KPIs where they are more tangential and less easier to label than certain KPIs. So there are some. So the harvesting records, so 1.7, for example, harvesting records through data catalogs such as Google Dataset Search. We'll be able to do that, and I'm already starting research on how we can do that and the effort it takes to do that through developing that functionality. Once we do that, it'll be very easy to see the analytics of how many people are coming through Google Dataset Search. That doesn't take much. We can put a threshold on it and a percentage value for how much we would be pleased with. For example, if we get 20% of our users through Google Dataset Search, we can probably say that was a good use of time. If we get just a steady stream, then it probably isn't worth it. Again, that will take time, and this is where that glacial time period comes in, because we're not going to see that sort of instant feedback and know it's worth it. We're going to have to invest just time and risk that and trust that these recommendations are worth it. And that's where Sarah's done the work. She's done 18 months to make sure that these recommendations are valuable, and having reviewed them and looked at them as well, we can trust that the recommendations will benefit the repositories and the groups as well. However, it's very difficult to make sure we can measure them and put some hard KPIs on them. So that's where the work is continuing, I'll say. Next slide. I think that might be me, unless...
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, brilliant. Thanks for that explanation of everything you're doing, lots of things you're doing at the Marine Data Exchange, and also, yeah, I think this topic of value, measuring the value, is extremely interesting to me. I would actually be really interested in hearing from some people in the audience. I don't know if some of you know anything about this topic of trying to demonstrate and measure the value, first of all, the value of fair data, but then also of the value of implementing this type of recommendation? Like, does anyone have experience or just thoughts about what we presented, just from your own experience? If anyone wants to speak, please go ahead or put your hand up or write in the chat. Does anyone have any experience on that topic? James?
Yeah, well, I work with Harry within Medin community, so we're looking at the fair, how you understand fair. But in terms of the wider elements of impact, have been doing a lot of stuff within the RDA on credit and tracing data through. So in terms of the fairness, if you're using PIDs, how you can actually track those through and determine the impact and the reuse of those data and where they've been used. Because it's not straightforward, even within scientific literature, which do cite, they don't necessarily cite the data, and there's big problems there. But then also within industry reports and things like that, if they're able to then cite and actually feed that data ecosystem, then that would be a step in the right direction to actually helping find impact and where those data have been reused. So that's the trick, is how do you actually trace it through? And the findability element with PIDs is one way that we're looking at how you can actually identify that.
Yeah. And how can you do that with PIDs?
So if someone cites something, they should feed it into the DOI registration services. So your DOI then gets a tag that says this is cited by this, and you should then be able to trace that through. One of the big problems, like I said, is that the publishers don't necessarily, the scientific journals don't necessarily do this well, let alone government industry reports. But the idea is that if they're putting DOIs on those reports and they're putting a list of references, they should be listing the data in there, and therefore you should be able to trace that impact of where the data have been reused. So doing a lot of work on that with the complex citation group within the RDA.
That's very interesting. So what's it called? What's the group called?
Complex Citation Interest Group. Although we're changing the name because Complex Citation Objects sounds like CC0 and no one likes the word complex. So we are due to change that name.
No one likes the word complex.
Those were actually very good points. Like we got like Zenodo managed to catch up some of the citations of articles, and it's always interesting as us as researchers who actually provide the data. It's both interesting to see like where the data is used, but also like I think it's a good incentive for academia to publish data when the data set it gets like picked up by things like Google Scholar and stuff, and to it like it actually gets citable things. So you can actually say, well, I'm not only like producing articles, I also do also provide data which has tangible benefits for all of these researchers, not just some research article. But yeah, even Zenodo did like, which probably is one of the best in terms of like data. They cannot catch all of the times that data set was referenced. So I don't know. It's probably most of the time it's the publishers, but it's hard to say.
I think it's a really interesting point though, because I really think academics would be motivated by being able to follow that. So in the Wind Energy Science Journal, which is kind of one of the journals that wind energy people publish in, they've released this new type of paper called data paper, but it's you end up having to write quite a lot about how the data was produced and also how you used it, and it's actually almost like a research article by the time you've finished. But I think they have talked about how to address that as well. Yeah, really interesting. I think the trouble is if people are not using it to publish, so let's say they download some of the data from the Marine Data Exchange and they do something for their company, and then they don't publish it. What does one do about that?
Sorry, go again. If the data doesn't get published on the Marine Data Exchange.
No, if somebody uses your data but they don't use it for publishable work, like they're not then
Yeah.
publishing what they did with it, they're just doing something internal or something that they don't want to publish, then you've lost it.
Yeah, we don't have that trace. And I'm my one things I do out of mainly of an interest thing is understanding trying to get as much traceability as possible, just so we can have that bit of a base. And it provides backing for, and it provides a business case for the Marine Data Exchange. The more users we can understand and say this is the good work that our data's feeding into, the more business backing we will have, which is not necessarily something we struggle with, but it doesn't hurt. But as you say, yeah, you're absolutely right. It just gets lost, and there has even been times where we've just found something that has referenced the Marine Data Exchange and using the Marine Data Exchange in which we had no sight of. So there's definitely work we could do there. It's just how best to go around that without locking the data down, because it would be very easy to put a login barrier to the data and then we can understand sort of who's using it, but that's not what we want to do. So it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's why Ørsted. I'm yet to talk to them in detail about it, but I'm pretty sure that's their point, that they have this data, they want people to use it, but they want to know what. Actually, I think they've published the data because they want people to solve some problems as to why the wind turbines weren't running optimally, and then they want. Yeah, so they want to know who it is, and they want to know what they're using it for, and they want to see the results. And but then it means that people don't. It's completely locked out, right? So I tried to access the data to actually do an analysis for these recommendations, and it took them so long to reply, and then eventually they replied and sent me this NDA, which I would have then had to fill out. I ended up not bothering. So yeah. Any other comments or ideas about this value topic? Maybe if anyone's got experience just in more generally, like demonstrating the value of stuff that we can maybe be inspired by. I don't know, Bridget, are you there? Like, do you think the Wind Data Hub could also think about doing some analysis like Harry presented?
Yeah, I think they'd definitely be interested in that for sure.
What do you think something needs to be done to this whole topic of getting use case owners to even start this process with us? So Ørsted, for example, they're like, oh, why should we talk to you? We've got our data, we publish it, we've got people using it, we don't really care. Why should we improve the fairness? And so then I wrote this big email trying to explain the value of fairness and why it would be interesting to work together. And it's kind of this cycle, this productive cycle that Harry was talking about. There's kind of a vicious cycle as well, which is like, well, why should we join? But then if they don't join, I can't show to them why they should join. And so this whole topic of like how to persuade, let's say, the Wind Data Hub now to get involved. Do you feel like that we need to do something differently to even persuade them to get started, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's constant education, right? I mean, even though FAIR has been around for 10 years, people still have no idea what it is, even within, communities that should. Yeah, I think people are just really busy, and especially like in the US with federal labs, it's even worse. And it's just not top priority. I don't think people are just trying to get through their own work.
Yeah, and I think that's probably valid to say for Ørsted, where Ørsted don't necessarily have a vested interest in making this data fair, because that's not their purpose. Them sharing that data is probably just a bit of a byproduct that they can do, whereas obviously the Marine Data Exchange, our sole purpose is to make this data fair. Like that is what my job is, and what the Marine Data Manager's job is, and therefore we've got a lot of a lot of purpose and vested interest in making this data fair, because that's what the Marine Data Exchange is made for. Whereas Ørsted, probably before they make the data fair, they'd probably just unpublish it to save themselves the work, I imagine. And I don't necessarily know the detail about what they're publishing, but it's an example where they're not there to share the data. They're there to, I guess, build wind farms or whatever. So it's about, I guess the purpose there is how can we make it as easy as possible for people like Ørsted to share data where they don't necessarily have a huge vested interest in doing it, and make it as easy as possible to make it fair as possible.
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of the whole point of the process. I mean, for some, they are publishing the data for some reason, like, and somebody has spent time preparing it and making it available. So my thought is that if they're going to do that, yeah, there must be a reason behind doing that. And if they're doing that, there probably is something that they can improve about it, depending on what their needs are. And so that's why I feel like having this conversation with them, yeah, we can't just assume they want to improve the fairness, because as I said, they might not want to, but they probably want to do something like, yeah, maybe what they want is to be able to do similar things, but do it quicker or more efficiently. And in which case, there might be some aspects of what we've done that can be applied to that can create value for them, and then therefore for other companies in similar situations. But yeah, you have to have the conversation with them in the first place in order to even find that out, right? And that's kind of the difficulty. Like, I've been trying to talk to them for months now, and hopefully I'm going to meet someone at Wind Europe to talk about it more, but it tends to be a bit of a cultural thing as well, like, and education, as Bridget said. I mean, we've had with the topic of ontologies and knowledge engineering and stuff. It's been, in IEA Wind Task 43, I joined it 3 or 4 years ago, and they spent 3 years basically just talking around in circles about the topic, because they didn't really understand it, but they also didn't really understand that they didn't understand it. And so I think one of the things that I brought in was just this total ignorance, and just saying, but actually admitting to the ignorance and just saying, oh, I've no idea what you guys are talking about. I'm not a computer scientist. Let's find out. And then Yuri wrote a very long, amazing review paper about knowledge engineering. But yeah, who's going to read that? People don't have time. So how do you communicate that to people who don't have time? Yeah. So any other thoughts or inputs about that before we move to the next topic? All right. So part 2 is about this fair software maturity. So yeah, the whole point of this is that we've developed the recommendations for data, and we tried to make them specific and accessible for wind energy people. And yeah, we're still working on the value demonstration and how to actually use them. Maybe we can improve them in the future. But the other topic we have had on the list for a long time is fair software. So the wind industry does produce, well, lots of code, also software, and we would like to look at how to improve this. And so I knew about this RDA group, the Fair Principles for Research software, and have looked into what their recommendations are, and these criteria are not entirely different from the data ones. They are different, but they have some similarities. And yeah, so Carlos agreed at the last minute yesterday. I think he put his slides in last night to tell us a little bit about it. It's also my fault because I asked the group very late, like only like a week ago. But yeah, I don't know, Carlos, if you can tell us a little bit about the group and what it does, and then after that we can have a think about if it makes sense for us to do a similar process for the software as we've done for the data.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's really really nice to understand a little bit more about the wind community, because of course it's not my area of expertise. My background is in computer science and in software quality, so making software fair and accessible and reusable for as many people as possible. That's the core of my job. I'm a community manager at the Netherlands eScience Center. So through that, I was involved in this process of creating the FAIR principles for software. But like you say, they're very similar to the FAIR principles for data. We actually thought, okay, are the FAIR principles for data applicable to software? And if not, where are the differences, and that's how we came with this list, which is basically just the adaptation to how is this applicable to software, with the main difference between data and software being that software is you want to execute it, you want to run it in a computer somewhere else. So you need a lot of the context environment, the dependencies of your software to be installed before you can run your software, which is with data, you have some dependency on the context and on the environment, but with software it's a little bit stronger. So can we go to the next slide? Because oh yeah, this is the one with animation. So this is just a little bit of the history of how the first FAIR software principles were developed. So already back in 2016, there was a working group from Force 11, if I'm not mistaken, and they started drafting these software citation principles, addressing the similar problem that you were mentioning. How do you cite? You create something, in this case software, and it's used by someone, but how do you track the credit that you get for that? How do you track who's using your software? Same as the issue, how do you track who's using your data? So they came up with these software citation principles, and the software citation formats were born from this initiative. So in 2018, there were some recommendations of things that you can do to make your data more and software more fair. And this led to, in 2019, there was a research paper written by a group of people about, okay, what do we need? What's the difference between data and software? Can we use the fair data principles for software? And if not, what's the difference between data and software that we need different principles? Which in turn led to the creation of this FAIR for Research Software working group as part of it was a joint group between Research Data Alliance, Research Software Alliance, and Force 11. So this working group ran from 2020 to 2022, which was the COVID year. So we were doing everything online and remotely, which was in a way handy because we were meeting across the globe anyway. But basically during this period, the working group analyzed the FAIR data principles, looking for the differences for, okay, how does this apply to software? How is this different? How should this be adapted to be different? We ran a few community consultations and tried to get input from people from different domains and who apply research software in different contexts. We ran into some interesting discussions like what is actually research software. So people who have only just a small script for analyzing some data, is that software? And our conclusion, we came with a definition of what does research software mean, and what is software that is used in research is Excel research software. If you analyze some data using Excel, does Excel count as research software? So there were very interesting discussions that didn't reach very concrete conclusions, let's put it that way. So actually there was a meeting with some of the same people a couple of weeks ago, and we ended up in the same discussion. It's like, well, but does that count as research software or not? But in general, the principles and the definitions mean that most software that is created for the purpose of research, and if you want people to reproduce your research using the same software, then you need your software to be findable and accessible and interoperable and reusable. So the working group actually finished already in 2022. And if we can go to the next slide, Sarah, please. There has been some activity by the group or as part of the maintenance plan of the group. So the working group is now officially part of the software source code interest group. So the software source code interest group in RDA are the ones who are say the stewards of the principles, and they make sure that this maintenance continues to run. So in 2024, we had 2 years after the principle had been published, we had a webinar to discuss the maintenance, and we decided to run a survey to analyze how were the principles being used 2 years after they were published. So this survey ran until March of 2025, and somewhere in April we had a webinar presenting some of these results, which I think the most important finding from this survey and from the experience of running these of having these principles in existence for that period of 2 years is that they're like the first principles for data. They're very high level, a little bit abstract, and we need to have like a actionable guidelines applicable to different domains, right? So that led to, I guess in parallel, they had already started a Research Software Alliance task force for actionable guidelines for making research software fair. So that task force has been running for about a year and a bit now. And they're really trying to say, okay, yes, we want to make software findable, and yes, it should have a DOI, but what is the best way to attach a DOI to the correct version of your software? And things like that, trying to make the guidelines more actionable. And I guess it would be interesting to see, okay, yes, you want to make your software fair, but how do you make that? What's the best way to make that for wind energy? And I suspect that most of the interesting parts would be in the interoperable. What does it mean for one wind energy analysis software to interoperate with another wind energy analysis software, which means they have to share formats in which they share the data, and they have to be aligned. So that's where the data and the software, also the fairness of the data and the fairness of the software, also kind of overlap. So I think it would be really interesting to see how this is applicable to your community. Yeah, I think that's more or less what I wanted to share with you. What's this story? How were the principles crafted? Where do they stand now? And how can they be applicable to your community?
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. Thank you. I'm really glad you came rather than me just reading something from a screen that I didn't know about anything about. Your question, you mentioned you had lots of discussions about what research software is, and it wasn't really conclusive. So we already started a similar conversation a little bit in wind energy, and because I kept using the word code and software interchangeably in a proposal, and then was told I need to differentiate between them, and so. But what I got from what you said is that research software for you could be somebody writing some Python code and putting it on GitHub and publishing it, and that is not software in the definition of what lots of people think the word software means. Like, it's not a package which has got an executable. So your understanding of research software is actually including this type of code on GitHub, basically.
Absolutely. I come from a computer science background, so software is everything that is not hardware.
Okay, good.
So code, of course, code is the instructions that you give to the machine to do something, to do a specific task. So of course, your script on GitHub is software.
It's quite interesting because that's what I was kind of intuitively thinking that software was, until I kind of got told that it wasn't. But now you're telling me that it could actually be. Okay, anyway, semantics, huh? But what's interesting in wind energy is that there is a difference. Like, so there are these softwares, like even open source software that people publish, and proprietary software. Let's say, for example, to do simulations like this full wind turbine simulation thing is a really popular type of software or code that people provide. And there's some open source ones and there's some commercial ones, but they do have some sort of common format that it hasn't come out of anybody thinking about fair or anything. It's just come because companies use different tools and want to be able to somehow interoperate. So there are some formats. Like we talked about this one with Carlos when we were talking about the digital twin. He uses like Hawk 2 and whatever these softwares are called, and he has some common format, and they actually even prepare the data in that format so it can be used by the tool. So these efforts are kind of going on sort of organically, but I'm sure the industry could benefit from doing that in a more coordinated way. But then the research software, so like code that people are writing, is a mess. Like people just write stuff and put it on GitHub and then hope that somebody might use it one day. So I can imagine some sort of guideline to help them do that and make it more, especially interoperable. I think is one of the main points.
Yeah, I think that the interoperability is probably one of the hardest parts to address. So there's a European project, EVERS, which is a project about software quality, and there the discussion about what counts as research software was also or is also something that is prominent in the project, and we are using something that we call the three-tier model of research software. So that means there's different things that are research software, and it can be anything from a small analysis code, the Python script that you choose to generate some graphs for your paper, to prototype tools, which is a little bit more maybe a small package that you install through the command line, and research software infrastructure, so that's like really more polished software that you use to processing large volumes of data or something like that. So, and of course, we have these three tiers, but we always find things that fall in between one or the other. Well, is this one a prototype or an analysis code? So I'm convinced that it's not a tier model, but it's more like a spectrum of like, okay, you have like everything in between.
So it can have a score of 2.79 or something rather than
Yeah.
2 or 3.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's but it's I think it's useful to have these think of these having this distinction that like not all the software is the same.
Yes.
So
yes.
making your software even making your software fair. What do you need for your analysis code might be different from what you need for your infrastructure code.
Yes, definitely. Are you so this actionable guidelines group, are you involved in that?
I am following the working groups, but I'm not very active, mainly due to lack of time. Yeah, too many things to do. But I am following all the progress, and I keep thinking to myself, well, I should be more involved. I should be more involved, but then 3 other things come along, and
I think it's probably worth us getting in touch with them, because it seems to be like that's kind of what we're doing. Like, so what we did in the data one was kind of like that as well. It was like, okay, there are these top level abstract recommendations. How do we actually apply them in our case, and then how do we recommend to people to actually use them for wind energy? And I feel like this software group might be kind of going in that direction. Maybe they'd be happy to have some sort of use case, and maybe even just collaborating with them rather than having our own group could be a thing. So I think as a next step, I'm definitely going to reach out to them.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of very knowledgeable people in the group. So I think definitely reaching out to them is a good first step.
Yeah. Okay, we've only got 5 minutes left in this session, so I just want to move on. We have a discussion that we have to have in the last 5 minutes about this group. So we have this working group, right? And the working group was finished, but submitting the recommendations is basically the end of the group. And as far as I understand in RDA, you can then turn it into like an interest group, so you can still keep going on the topic if you want to, and then you can do something else, or you can decide not to do it anymore. And I guess I would be interested in talking about that. Like, I have to say, the core group at the end was basically me and Yuri and Serco. Bridget was also involved at some point, and Carlos, and who else was involved? A couple of people, but three, like, we had meetings where there was 2 of us in there, or let's say in the best case 4. And yeah, I don't know whether it's worth continuing if we don't really have anybody doing anything. As I said, we're planning to have a working group in IAA Wind Task 43 looking at this software thing. So we could just continue that as Task 43 rather than as RDA. There are some advantages to being under RDA. You know, it's just like being able to present at things like this and engage with, find out what everyone else is doing. It's quite difficult on the website just to, you know, look to see what everyone's doing. It's much easier when someone like Carlos comes and tells us, and people come and listen and talk to us. It's definitely easier, but I don't know whether it's worth the effort or not. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? I mean, there are some people here who don't know us and are probably just coming to find out what we're doing. There are some people who have been involved. Does anybody have anything to say on the topic?
I mean, one thing I wanted to say is that one thing that would particularly benefit from being under RDA umbrella would be, oh, come on, John,
Yeah, I just saw it.
would be developing a kind of like a metadata model for the wind energy data on the web.
Yes.
Which would be squarely inside the focuses of RDA and have all the access to the experts that work on other metadata models. But the main issue here is, as you said, is if we manage to get maybe like that would be the first step, trying to get like people who would be interested in participating and getting their commitment before they start in the group. And if we get enough people, then we make a decision of okay, we'll start a work group on it.
I find that the interface or the difference between IAA Wind Task 43 and then we have We Do Wind, which we're using as a platform to run some of these working groups, and RDA, it's quite difficult. So we actually, because the RDA website wasn't working when we started, like the new website wasn't working properly when we started, we actually started running this group on the We Do Wind platform, which means that we had all the documents and the meetings and the discussions in there. And then the RDA website was working, so we actually had to move everything back to the RDA website. And on We Do Wind, we just have a link to that. And then we also have Task 43, where we had basically a massive overlap, but we couldn't submit joint recommendations. So these recommendations were RDA recommendations and not IAA Wind recommendations, which was a shame. And so, yeah, it seems to be quite blurry. Like, I think the people from wind energy, we should be engaging from IAA and from We Do Wind, but I know that we might be able to engage RDA experts by having it as part of an RDA group, or like metadata model experts. But then we don't necessarily have to have an RDA group to do that. We can just do it and invite people.
Yeah, it's just an interest group, and then it's open and it has contacts, and people will just reach out to us if they do find us. So that, yeah, and we can engage with RDA on our own.
Yeah. So, has anyone else got an opinion or can speak from their own experience of turning working groups into interest groups? Okay, it's 9:30. So we'll put that as a point still to discuss that's open. I think the metadata model for wind energy data on the web could be something, because we need to do that anyway. At the moment, we don't have a group doing that. So let's have a think about that. We could do some sort of launch webinar on it and see if anyone comes. And if no one comes, we don't do it. And if people come, we do.
But yeah, I feel like it needs like a lot of pre-work of like getting
explaining
people from who would be interested in it. Hopefully some from the companies actually.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's keep that open for now. Then I guess we close this session. So thanks. Well, Harry left, but thanks to Harry for speaking, and thanks to Carlos for speaking, and yeah, I hope it was interesting for you all. And yeah, get in touch with me if you have any more questions, have any questions at all. You can see my email address actually in that document where you put your own names. Yeah, so thanks everybody, and see you all another time.